Evening, friends. Gather round. Let the fire chase the chill from the air and the weariness from your bones. Tonight, we're riding into a landscape etched by wind and time, a place where the horizon stretches out forever, holding secrets as vast and unforgiving as the land itself. We're talking about the American West, a crucible that tested souls, forged legends, and sometimes demanded a terrible price for survival. Out there, justice wasn't always served on a silver platter by a man with a tin star. Sometimes it had to be clawed back from the dust, taken by a hand that had lost much but forgotten nothing. Sometimes the truest aim comes not from two eyes, but from a single burning purpose. Our gaze settles tonight on the aftermath, the ragged edges of violence left baking under a brutal Montana sun. Picture this: a narrow canyon pass, walls of sheer rock rising like silent, indifferent witnesses. Down below, amidst shattered pinyon and scattered shale, lies the wreckage of what was supposed to be a routine transfer. A smashed strongbox lies empty, its hinges torn, glinting uselessly. Nearby, sprawled awkwardly amongst the unforgiving rocks, lies a man, or what's left of him, still breathing, shallowly, raggedly, but only just. His face is a ruin, caked with dust and blood, one side horribly damaged. Flies buzz lazily in the oppressive heat. He's been left for dead. Stripped of his gun, his horse gone, his world reduced to pain, betrayal, and the slow creep of darkness. This isn't the end of his story, friends. Oh no. This is just the brutal beginning. Because sometimes, when you take everything from a man, you leave him with the one thing that can bring him back: a reason. Let's rewind the clock, travel back just a few short months before that bloody day in Devil's Jaw Pass. Our man had a name then, one spoken with respect in the booming town of Redemption Creek. Coleman Travers. Cole, to his friends. Tall, lean, quick with a smile as he was, with the Colt Peacemaker strapped to his hip. He wasn't just any man. He was Deputy Marshal Coleman Travers, right hand to Marshal Elias Thorne. Redemption Creek was booming, riding high on a silver strike that had drawn hopefuls and hard cases alike from every corner of the territory. It was a raw, sprawling town clinging to the banks of a fast-flowing river. A chaotic mix of tents, hastily built shacks, and a few imposing brick buildings. The assay office, the bank, and the Grand Solomon's Palace Saloon, owned by the town's undisputed magnate, Marcus Thorne, the marshal's older, wealthier brother. Cole Travers wasn't born to the badge, but he wore it well. He drifted into Redemption Creek a couple of years prior, looking for honest work. His past a closed book he didn't offer to open. Marshal Thorne, a man whose weary eyes seemed older than his years, saw something in Cole. A steadiness, a sharp eye, an innate sense of fairness, and a quiet competence with a firearm that commanded respect without needing to boast. He'd offered Cole the deputy's star, and Cole had taken it, finding a sense of purpose he hadn't known he was missing. He became Thorne's shadow, his backup, the man who rode shotgun on prisoner transfers and payroll shipments. The one who faced down rowdy miners in the saloons with a calm word before resorting to force. He was good at his job, trusted, respected by the townsfolk, if not always liked by the rougher element drawn by the silver boom. His life had found a rhythm in Redemption Creek. He had a small rented room above the mercantile, took his meals at Maud's Diner, where the coffee was strong and the biscuits passable, shared occasional beers with the marshal at the less ostentatious saloon across from Solomon's Palace, the Dusty Mug. He was saving his pay, dreaming maybe of buying a small piece of land outside town someday, a place where the silence wasn't filled with drunken shouts and gunfire. He was good friends with the marshal, Elias Thorne. They understood each other, two men trying to impose a semblance of order on a town bursting at the seams with greed and desperation. Elias was a decent man, fundamentally honest, though perhaps overshadowed by his powerful, ambitious older brother, Marcus. Marcus Thorne ran Redemption Creek, not officially, but everyone knew it. His mining interests, his saloon, his control over the bank, his influence was everywhere. He was charming when he wanted to be, ruthless when necessary. A man who believed money paved the path to power and respectability. He and Elias seemed cordial enough, though Cole sometimes sensed a tension beneath the surface, a difference in their natures as wide as the creek itself. Cole also had a partner, of sorts, not another deputy. Marshal Thorne preferred to keep his official force small, but a man named Jake Riley. Riley was a tracker, a guide, sometimes hired by the marshal's office for his knowledge of the surrounding territory, his skill in navigating the treacherous mountain passes, and reading sign. Riley was rough around the edges, a man more comfortable under the stars than under a roof, quiet, watchful, with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Cole had ridden with Riley on several occasions, tracking claim jumpers, escorting nervous witnesses, and lately accompanying the heavily guarded silver shipments from the outlying mines down to the assay office and Marcus Thorne's bank vault. Cole trusted Riley's skills implicitly, respected his knowledge of the wild country that surrounded Redemption Creek like a hungry wolf. They weren't close friends, perhaps, Riley being too solitary for that, but there was a mutual respect built on shared danger and competence. That fateful shipment, the one that ended in Devil's Jaw Pass, was supposed to be routine. A significant amount of smelted silver, enough to make any man think twice, heading from the Lucky Penny mine, one of Marcus Thorne's richest claims, back to town. Marshal Thorne himself was laid up with a badly broken leg after a fall from his horse, a fall that seemed suspiciously unlucky given the timing. So the responsibility fell squarely on Deputy Cole Travers. He rode out with two trusted guards from the mine, hired men Cole knew slightly, and Jake Riley, hired specifically by Marcus Thorne, ostensibly for his knowledge of the safest route through the back passes, avoiding the main, more vulnerable road. Cole remembered the morning clearly, the weight of the silver bars loaded onto the pack mules, the nervous energy of the mine guards, young men keenly aware of the value they were protecting. Jake Riley, quiet as ever, checking the cinches on the mules, his face unreadable beneath the brim of his dusty hat. Cole himself, feeling the weight of responsibility, checking his Colt, settling his rifle in the scabbard. He remembered shaking Marshal Thorne's hand before leaving, the older man's grip surprisingly strong despite his injury. "Be careful, Cole," Elias had warned, his eyes troubled. "Something about this feels off. Watch Riley. Watch everyone." Cole had nodded, reassuringly, perhaps too confidently. "Don't you worry, Marshal. We'll be fine. Riley knows these hills better than his own hand." Famous last words. The journey started uneventfully. The high mountain air was crisp, the scenery spectacular, jagged peaks clawing at the impossibly blue sky. Riley led them expertly through winding game trails and narrow passes, routes Cole himself barely knew existed. The tracker was quiet, almost unnervingly so, occasionally pointing out sign, deer tracks, a distant eagle circling, but offering little conversation. The mine guards grew more relaxed as the miles passed uneventfully. Cole tried to stay alert, remembering Elias Thorne's warning, but the steady rhythm of the horses, the vastness of the wilderness, the seeming competence of his companions lulled him into a sense of security. He scanned the ridgelines, watched their back trail, but saw nothing amiss. They reached Devil's Jaw Pass late in the afternoon, a narrow bottleneck, shadowed and claustrophobic after the open high country. Jagged rocks littered the canyon floor, a perfect place for an ambush. Cole felt a prickle of unease, his hand instinctively moving towards his Colt. "Let's move through quick," he urged, nudging his horse forward. That's when all hell broke loose. It wasn't gunfire from the rocks above, as Cole might have expected. The first shot came from behind him. One of the young mine guards cried out, slumping forward in his saddle. Before Cole could react, could even turn fully, another shot cracked the air, closer this time. The second guard gasped, clutching his chest, falling sideways from his horse. Cole whirled, drawing his Colt, shock warring with adrenaline. He saw Jake Riley, not 20 feet away, his rifle still smoking, his face no longer unreadable but twisted into a mask of cold, predatory focus. Riley fired again, aiming directly at Cole. The bullet slammed into Cole's shoulder, spinning him halfway around, knocking him from the saddle. He hit the rocky ground hard, the impact jarring the breath from his lungs, his Colt clattering away amongst the stones. Through a haze of pain and disbelief, Cole looked up. Riley was walking towards him, rifle leveled, but he wasn't alone. Another figure emerged from behind a cluster of boulders, a figure Cole knew instantly, despite the bandana pulled up over the lower half of his face. The expensive boots, the tailored coat, the cold, ambitious eyes visible above the cloth. Marcus Thorne. "Sorry, Deputy," Thorne said, his voice smooth, devoid of any real regret, though his eyes held a flicker of something else. Triumph, perhaps. "Nothing personal. Just business. This silver was needed elsewhere, and well, you saw too much." Cole tried to speak, to understand the depth of the betrayal, but pain and shock choked the words back. Riley stepped closer, raising his rifle. Cole instinctively threw up an arm to protect his head. The butt of the rifle slammed down, not where he expected, but with sickening force against the side of his face, shattering bone, blinding him in a universe of white-hot agony. He heard Marcus Thorne laugh, a cold, sharp sound that echoed in the canyon. Then darkness swallowed him whole. They took the silver, stripped him of his badge and remaining sidearm, and rode away, leaving him broken, bleeding, and presumed dead in the dust and shadows of Devil's Jaw Pass. They never even bothered to check if he was truly gone. A fatal oversight. Agony. That was the first sensation that clawed its way back through the thick, suffocating darkness. A relentless, searing agony centered on the left side of his face, radiating through his skull, down his neck, into his shattered shoulder. He tried to move, a low groan escaping his lips. But even that small effort sent waves of nausea and fresh pain washing over him. He lay still, breathing shallowly, listening. Silence. Only the buzz of flies, the whisper of the wind through the canyon, and the frantic pounding of his own heart. They were gone. They'd left him to die. Slowly, painstakingly, fighting the encroaching blackness that threatened to pull him under again, Cole assessed his situation. His left eye, he couldn't see out of it, couldn't feel it, only a horrific, sticky wetness and the sharp, jagged edges of broken bone beneath swollen flesh. His shoulder throbbed mercilessly, likely broken along with the gunshot wound. His head felt like it had been split open with an axe. He was weaponless, horseless, miles from anywhere, bleeding and crippled. Survival seemed not just unlikely, but impossible. Despair washed over him, cold and bleak. Betrayal burned hotter than the pain. Jake Riley, the quiet tracker he'd trusted. Marcus Thorne, the powerful man who ran the town, brother of the Marshal Cole served. They had planned it, executed it with chilling precision. Killed 2 young men, left Cole for dead, all for silver? Or was there more to it? Elias Thorne's warning echoed in his fractured consciousness. Watch Riley. Watch everyone. Had the marshal suspected his own brother? The thought was too monstrous, too complex for his shattered mind to grasp fully. All he knew was the raw, consuming agony of betrayal. He didn't know how long he lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness, tormented by thirst and pain. Hours, maybe a day. The sun beat down mercilessly, then retreated, leaving a chilling cold that seeped into his bones. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that if he didn't move, didn't find water, didn't find help, this canyon would be his grave. The thought, strangely, didn't frighten him as much as anger him. Anger at Riley, anger at Thorne, anger at being left like discarded refuse. That anger, that raw, burning fury, became a spark in the darkness, a reason to fight back against the inevitable. He started to move, inch by agonizing inch, using his good arm, gritting his teeth against the waves of pain. He dragged himself across the rocks, seeking shade, seeking anything. His vision swam. The world tilted crazily. He followed the downward slope of the canyon, instinct telling him water might gather somewhere below. He crawled, pulled himself forward, leaving a smeared trail of blood on the stones. His throat was sandpaper, his lips cracked and bleeding. Just a little further. Just find water. He found it. Not a flowing stream, but a small, scummy seep hidden amongst a cluster of ferns in a deep crevice, barely more than a muddy puddle. He didn't care. He plunged his face into it, sucking greedily at the lukewarm, metallic-tasting water, ignoring the mud, ignoring the pain it caused his ruined face. It wasn't much, but it was life. He drank until he could drink no more, then collapsed beside the seep, shivering uncontrollably despite the lingering heat trapped in the rocks. He must have passed out again. When he awoke, it wasn't sunlight that greeted his remaining good eye, but firelight. He was lying on a rough pallet of pine boughs, covered by a thick, greasy-smelling buffalo hide. A small fire crackled nearby, casting dancing shadows on the walls of what appeared to be a small cave or rock shelter. The agonizing throb in his head and shoulder had subsided slightly, replaced by a dull, heavy ache. His face felt stiff, bandaged crudely but effectively with strips of cloth and some kind of pungent herbal poultice that smelled of pine sap and sage. A figure sat near the fire, tending a small pot that emitted a savory, gamey aroma. An old man, ancient-looking, with skin like tanned leather stretched tight over high cheekbones, long gray hair braided down his back, and eyes as dark and watchful as a hawk's. He wore buckskins, old and worn, and moved with a quiet deliberation that spoke of years spent alone in the wilderness. He looked up as Cole stirred, his expression unreadable. "Awake," the old man stated simply. His voice was raspy, unused. "Thought maybe Spirit Walk take you." Cole tried to speak, but only a croak emerged. The old man offered him a ladle of water, cool and clean this time. Cole drank gratefully. Who are you?" Cole managed, his voice weak. "Called Ishki," the old man replied. He gestured vaguely towards the mountains. "Live here, long time. Found you, down canyon." Buzzards were circling. He stirred the pot. Bad shape. Face, eye gone. Cole instinctively reached up, his fingers brushing the thick bandage. Eye gone. The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. He closed his good eye, absorbing the brutal finality of it. Shoulder broken. Shot. Ishki continued his dispassionate assessment. "Bad men did this?" Cole nodded mutely, the memory of Riley and Thorne flooding back, bringing a fresh wave of anger and despair. "Rest now," Ishki said, offering a bowl of steaming stew. "Eat. Get strong. Mountains test spirit." For days, maybe weeks, time lost meaning in the dim cave. Ishki tended to Cole. He cleaned and dressed his wounds with practiced hands, using poultices and salves made from plants Cole didn't recognize. He splinted Cole's shoulder expertly. He fed him broth, then stew made from rabbit or grouse Ishki trapped nearby. He spoke little, preferring the silence of the mountains, but his presence was a constant, steady anchor in Cole's sea of pain and confusion. Ishki seemed to be of Native American descent, though from what tribe Cole couldn't guess. He seemed a man apart, belonging only to the peaks and canyons. He asked no questions about Cole's past, about who had done this to him. He simply offered healing, shelter, and the quiet wisdom of survival. Slowly, agonizingly, Cole began to heal. The raw pain subsided, leaving deep aches and a profound weakness. His shoulder began to knit, though Ishki warned it would never be the same. The wound on his face scarred over, leaving a ravaged landscape where his left eye had been. Ishki fashioned a crude patch for him from a piece of soft leather, hiding the worst of the damage, but doing little to conceal the disfigurement. Cole avoided looking at his reflection in the still pools of water Ishki brought him. He didn't want to see the stranger staring back. The loss of his eye was the hardest adjustment. The world felt flat, off balance. Depth perception was gone, replaced by a confusing, one-sided reality. Simple tasks became difficult. Pouring water, reaching for objects, even walking on uneven ground felt treacherous. He stumbled often, misjudged distances, felt a constant, frustrating vulnerability. The easy confidence he once possessed was shattered, replaced by hesitation and uncertainty. But Ishki was patient. He encouraged Cole to walk, first inside the cave, then outside in the small clearing. He taught him simple tasks again, how to compensate, how to rely more on his other senses, how to move deliberately, aware of his new limitations. And he began to teach him something else. One day, Ishki handed Cole a bow, stout but shorter than Cole was used to, and a quiver of arrows fletched with hawk feathers. "Need learn hunt again," Ishki stated simply. "Need eat," Cole protested. He could barely walk straight, let alone handle a weapon. His shoulder was still weak, his vision unreliable. But Ishki insisted. He set up a target, a piece of bark leaning against a tree, and demonstrated, drawing the bow smoothly, releasing the arrow with effortless grace. It struck the center of the bark with a soft thud. Cole tried. It was a disaster. He fumbled with the arrow, struggled to draw the bowstring with his weakened shoulder, couldn't line up the shot with his single eye. The arrow flew wide, skittering harmlessly into the underbrush. He tried again, frustration mounting. Failure, again, failure. He threw the bow down in disgust. "I can't do this. My eye. I can't see straight." Ishki picked up the bow calmly. "Two eyes see wide," he said, his voice quiet. "One eye. Must see deep. Feel arrow. Feel target. Become one." He tapped his temple. "Focus here. Not here." He tapped Cole's good eye. Cole didn't understand. Not fully. But he picked up the bow again. Ishki showed him a different stance, taught him to rely on instinct, on the feel of the drawn string against his cheek, on an intense, narrowed focus that seemed to block out everything but the target. Slowly, painstakingly, Cole began to adapt. He learned to compensate for the lack of depth perception by concentrating fiercely, by judging distance through subtle cues, by trusting the muscle memory Ishki helped him rebuild. His shots were still erratic, but gradually they began to improve. He started hitting the target, not consistently, but often enough to feel a flicker of returning competence. Then Ishki brought out something else. Not a rifle, not Cole's familiar Colt, but an old, heavy cap and ball revolver, a relic from decades past. "Bow good for silence," Ishki said. "Sometimes need noise." Handling the familiar weight of a handgun felt strange, unbalanced with his altered vision. Ishki didn't teach him speed drawing or fancy gunplay. He taught him stillness, patience, focus. He set up smaller targets, pine cones balanced on rocks, pebbles tossed into the air. "One eye sees true," Ishki repeated. "No distraction. Only target. Breathe slow. Squeeze." Cole practiced relentlessly. The frustration returned, stronger this time. Aiming a handgun required precise alignment, something his single eye struggled with. He missed far more often than he hit. The temptation to give up, To accept his brokenness was overwhelming. But the memory of Riley's betrayal, of Thorne's cold laugh, fueled him. He wouldn't be broken. He wouldn't be helpless. And then something shifted. Maybe it was Ishki's relentless patience. Maybe it was his own stubborn determination. Maybe it was some strange rewiring in his brain, compensating for the loss. He found that by shutting out everything else, by entering a state of almost meditative concentration, by focusing his entire being on the target through his single eye, his aim became uncanny. He wasn't seeing depth the way he used to, but he was feeling the trajectory, sensing the alignment. He began hitting the pine cones consistently. He started hitting the pebbles Ishki tossed, first occasionally, then more often than not. His draw wasn't fast. His movements were deliberate, compensating for his blind side. But when he aimed, when he achieved that state of intense, one-eyed focus, he didn't miss. It wasn't magic. It was adaptation, born of trauma, concentration forged in the fires of loss and determination. It was different. It was slower, but it was deadly accurate. As his physical strength returned and his new skill solidified, Cole's thoughts turned increasingly back towards Redemption Creek, towards the men who had betrayed him and left him for dead. The initial shock and despair had coalesced into a cold, hard knot of purpose in his gut. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about answers. It was about justice. Or maybe it was about revenge. The line felt blurry, indistinct in the stark landscape of his altered world. He knew he couldn't simply ride back into town as Coleman Travers. He was presumed dead. His return would cause chaos, alert Thorne and Riley immediately. And he wasn't the same man who had left. The easy smile was gone, replaced by the grim set of his scarred face, hidden partly by the leather patch. The trusting nature had been burned away, leaving behind a wary, watchful intensity. He was slower, more deliberate, his movements hampered by his vision and his mending shoulder. But he had Ishki's mountain-honed survival skills, and he had his one good eye, now honed to a terrifyingly perfect aim. He needed information. He needed to know what had happened in Redemption Creek since the ambush. Had Riley surfaced? Had Marcus Thorne solidified his power? Had Marshal Elias Thorne recovered from his accident? Did anyone even suspect foul play? He thanked Ishki, a simple exchange between two men who understood the harsh language of survival better than words. Ishki nodded, accepting his departure as stoically as he had accepted his arrival. "Mountains remember," was all he said, pressing a small pouch of dried herbs into Cole's hand. "Good for pain, good for focus." Cole took the old cap and ball revolver Ishki offered, a weapon no one would associate with Deputy Travers, a supply of powder and ball, a sturdy knife, and Ishki's bow and arrows. Dressed in rough buckskins Ishki had provided, his scarred face partially concealed by the patch and the shadow of a low-brimmed hat Ishki had fashioned from beaver pelt, he looked like just another nameless drifter. A man scarred by the wilderness, easily overlooked. He descended from the high mountain sanctuary that had been his refuge and his crucible, heading back towards the world that had tried to erase him. He didn't ride towards Redemption Creek directly. He circled wide, approaching from the south, using the tracking skills Riley had inadvertently taught him, skills now augmented by Ishki's deeper understanding of the land. He moved slowly, cautiously, observing, listening, a ghost haunting the edges of his former life. He made a camp in the dense woods, several miles outside town, close enough to observe the comings and goings on the main trail, but hidden from casual view. For days, he watched. He saw familiar faces riding in and out, ranchers, prospectors, townsfolk. He saw mine wagons rumbling towards the assay office, guarded now by heavily armed men wearing the double C brand. Silas Crofts brand? No. Marcus Thorne used a simple MT brand. Thorne must have expanded his reach, perhaps taken over Croft's holdings if Croft had ever been a player here. Cole corrected his memory. Thorne's brand was indeed MT. The guards wore Thorne mining insignia. He saw Jake Riley ride into town once, looking smug and prosperous, disappearing into Solomon's Palace saloon. The sight sent a fresh jolt of cold fury through Cole. Riley hadn't just vanished. He was thriving on his betrayal. He saw Marshal Elias Thorne, limping heavily, aided by a cane, making slow, painful rounds of the town, his face looking even more weary, etched with a sadness that seemed deeper than just physical pain. Did the marshal suspect? Or did he believe the official story Cole could only guess at, that Deputy Travers and the guards had been killed by bandits, the silver stolen, perhaps even implicating Cole himself posthumously? And he saw Marcus Thorne riding his fine horse through town like a king surveying his domain, accepting greetings, dispensing patronage, his power seemingly absolute, unchallenged. He looked sleek, satisfied, untouched by the violence he had orchestrated. The town itself felt different, tenser. The easy boomtown optimism seemed to have curdled slightly, replaced by an undercurrent of fear, of caution. There were more rough-looking men lounging on the street corners, men who looked like hired muscle, wearing sidearms openly, their eyes cold and watchful. Marcus Thorne's influence seemed to have tightened its grip. Cole knew he needed to get closer, needed to hear the whispers, gather the threads of information. He couldn't remain a ghost in the woods forever. He needed to go into Redemption Creek, but not as Cole Travers. He needed a new identity, a new face, a reason to be there that wouldn't immediately raise alarms. He looked down at the scarred leather patch covering his missing eye, felt the unfamiliar weight of the old cap and ball revolver tucked into his waistband. He was a different man now, forged in betrayal and pain, honed by survival and loss. He had returned from the dead, armed with a terrible skill and a burning question. Could one eye, one gun, and one man's relentless purpose bring justice, or only more destruction, to Redemption Creek? The answer lay somewhere in the dusty streets ahead, waiting to be unearthed. Cole needed a way into town, a plausible reason for a scarred, one-eyed stranger to linger without attracting the wrong kind of attention. He couldn't just walk in and start asking questions about Marcus Thorne or Jake Riley. He needed cover, a role to play. He spent a couple more days observing, circling the town's periphery, using the skills Ishki had taught him. He noticed the steady traffic heading towards the small, struggling sawmill located downriver from the town, run by a grizzled old-timer named Silas Henderson. The mill seemed perpetually short-handed, The demand for timber, fueled by Redemption Creek's relentless expansion under Thorne's influence. It was hard, dangerous work, the kind that often attracted drifters, men looking for a temporary stake, men whose pasts weren't closely scrutinized as long as they could handle an axe or wrestle logs. It seemed as good a place as any to blend in. He cached his bow and arrows, keeping only the knife and the old revolver hidden beneath his buckskin shirt. He roughed up his appearance even further, rubbing dirt into his clothes, letting his beard grow ragged. He practiced walking with a more pronounced limp than Elias Thorne's, favoring his wounded shoulder slightly, adopting the shuffling gait of a man worn down by hardship. When he finally walked into Silas Henderson's lumber camp, located a mile or so from the main bustle of Redemption Creek, he looked like just another piece of human flotsam washed up by the tide of the silver boom. Scarred, down on his luck, looking for work, any work. Names? Kane, Cole said, his voice deliberately roughened, unused to speaking more than a few words after his time with Ishki. He addressed the burly foreman, a man named Harker, whose face looked like it had stopped a log drive or two. Looking for work. Can handle an axe. Strong back. Harker looked him up and down skeptically, his gaze lingering on the eye patch. Only got one peeper, friend. This ain't easy work. Need both eyes to watch for falling timber and saw blades. Lost the eye, not the will to work, Cole replied evenly, meeting Harker's gaze steadily with his good eye. Pay my way. Don't cause trouble. Harker grunted, spat tobacco juice into the sawdust. He was desperate for men. All right, Kane. We pay by the day, grub included. Bunk in the shed back there. Don't slow us down, and keep that good eye open. One mistake here gets you killed faster than a stray bullet in town. And just like that, Kane became part of the sawmill crew. The work was brutal, back-breaking labor that pushed his recovering body to its limits. Felling trees, hauling logs, wrestling with the screaming saws. His shoulder ached constantly, and the lack of depth perception made judging distances for axe swings or maneuvering heavy timber treacherous. But he endured it, driven by his underlying purpose. He kept his head down, spoke little, listened much. The sawmill crew was a rough mix. Failed prospectors, drifters between jobs, a few homesteaders trying to earn extra cash. Talk around the cook fire at night was mostly about aches and pains, the poor quality of the food, gambling debts, and news from town. Cole listened intently, piecing together the narrative of Redemption Creek in the months since his death. The official story, as he gleaned from fragments of conversation, was much as he'd feared. Deputy Travers and the guards had been ambushed by ruthless road agents in Devil's Jaw Pass. A fierce firefight ensued. Travers and the guards fought bravely, but were ultimately overwhelmed and killed. The silver shipment vanished. Jake Riley, the guide, had miraculously survived, claiming he'd been knocked unconscious early in the fight and played dead until the bandits left. He'd staggered back to the nearest outpost with the tragic news. Marcus Thorne had publicly lauded Deputy Travers's heroism, offered generous pensions to the widows of the guards, a gesture that cemented his reputation for civic-mindedness, and put up a hefty reward for the capture of the unknown bandits, a reward everyone knew would never be claimed. Cole Travers was officially a dead hero. Jake Riley was the lucky survivor, now often seen in Marcus Thorne's company, seemingly elevated from wilderness guide to trusted associate. No one seemed to suspect foul play, at least not openly. Marcus Thorne's power was too absolute, his carefully crafted image too solid. Any whispers of doubt were quickly silenced or dismissed as sour grapes from rivals. Marshal Elias Thorne, recovering slowly from his broken leg, seemed diminished, withdrawn, consumed by grief over his fallen deputy, and perhaps, Cole wondered, by unspoken suspicions he couldn't voice or act upon. Cole, working as Kane, started making occasional trips into Redemption Creek on his day off, usually coinciding with payday. He needed supplies, but more importantly, he needed to see the town, feel its pulse, observe his betrayers up close. Walking down the familiar main street was a surreal experience. He saw faces he recognized: Maud from the diner, Hank the blacksmith, Doc Evans. But they looked right through him, seeing only a scarred, one-eyed laborer from the sawmill. The anonymity was both a shield and a constant, painful reminder of everything he had lost. He spent his meager pay at the Dusty Mug, the quieter saloon opposite Marcus Thorne's opulent Solomon's Palace. It was less likely to attract Thorne's direct attention or Riley's presence. He'd sit in a dark corner, nursing a cheap beer, listening. He learned that Marcus Thorne was squeezing the independent miners harder than ever, using his control of the assay office and the bank to undervalue their ore and force them into selling their claims cheaply. He heard rumors of questionable accidents happening to those who resisted too strongly. He saw the increased presence of Thorne's hired guns, acting as unofficial enforcers, intimidating anyone who stepped out of line. Redemption Creek wasn't just booming anymore. It was suffocating under Marcus Thorne's tightening grip. He saw Jake Riley occasionally, usually entering or leaving Solomon's Palace, dressed now in finer clothes than Cole had ever seen him wear, looking sleek and confident. Riley never glanced towards the Dusty Mug, never noticed the one-eyed man watching him from the shadows. Each sighting stoked the cold fire in Cole's gut, but he forced himself to remain patient. Direct confrontation now would be suicide. He needed more than just the truth. He needed leverage, proof, a way to dismantle Thorne's empire and Riley's lies without getting himself killed in the process. His internal struggle intensified. The desire for vengeance warred constantly with the ingrained sense of justice from his deputy days. Was his purpose to kill the men who betrayed him? Or was it to expose them, to see them face the law, however flawed it might be in Redemption Creek? Killing them might be simpler, cleaner in some ways, a direct response to their brutality. But would it truly satisfy the deeper need for restitution, for the truth to be known? And could he do it? Could he become a killer, even to avenge his own death and the murder of the guards? Ishki had taught him to survive, had honed his aim, but he hadn't taught him to kill without cause. He found himself watching Marshal Elias Thorne closely whenever their paths crossed in town. The marshal looked like a man carrying an impossible weight. He performed his duties mechanically, his limp a constant reminder of his vulnerability, his eyes holding a deep, abiding sadness. Cole longed to approach him, to reveal himself, to gauge whether the marshal suspected his brother, but the risk was too great. If Elias was compromised, either through loyalty or fear, revealing himself would be signing his death warrant. Cole had to assume he was completely alone in this. He focused on his shooting. In the woods outside the lumber camp, during precious moments away from the grueling work, he practiced with the old cap and ball revolver. The meditative focus Ishki had taught him became his refuge. He discovered that the loss of his eye, while a hindrance in many ways, seemed to have intensified his concentration when aiming. It was as if all his remaining visual input, all his mental energy, channeled down that single line of sight. He learned the heft and balance of the unfamiliar weapon, the trigger pull, the recoil. He became uncannily accurate, able to hit small targets at remarkable distances with deliberate, unhurried shots. It wasn't fast, but it was precise. Lethally precise. The skill felt cold, alien, a tool forged from his trauma, waiting for its purpose. One evening, at the Dusty Mug, nursing a beer, Cole overheard a hushed conversation between two disgruntled prospectors at the next table. They were complaining about Marcus Thorne, about how he'd cheated them, how he seemed to have an inside track on every new strike, how he always knew exactly where the richest veins lay, sometimes even before the claim was officially filed. "It ain't natural," one grumbled. "It's like he's got eyes underground. Knew about the Lucky Penny strike, for old man Harris even finished digging the discovery shaft. And remember the Widow Jenkins claim?" the other added, his voice low. "Richest pocket on the whole creek. Thorne tried to buy her out cheap. She refused. Next week, cave in. Tragic accident, the marshal called it. Thorne bought the claim from her grieving son for pennies on the dollar. Inside information, questionable accidents. A pattern emerged, darker and more complex than simple greed over one silver shipment. The ambush in Devil's Jaw Pass. Maybe it wasn't just about stealing that specific load. Maybe Cole and the guards had been eliminated because they represented the legitimate authority, the last obstacle to Thorne's complete, unquestioned control over the silver flowing out of the mountains. Maybe the silver itself wasn't the primary goal, but securing the source, the knowledge of future strikes. How did Thorne always seem to know? The question lodged itself in Cole's mind. He started paying closer attention to the operations around the SI office, to the flow of information, to the men who worked for Thorne not just as guards, but as surveyors, assayers, clerks. He needed to understand the mechanism of Thorne's power before he could hope to dismantle it. His quest for justice, or revenge, was becoming more complicated. The roots of the corruption running deeper than he had initially imagined. He was no longer just hunting his betrayers. He was uncovering a conspiracy that held the entire town, perhaps the entire territory, in its grip, and he was still just one man, scarred and alone, with one eye and one old gun, standing against an empire built on greed and secrets. The odds felt impossibly long. Cole knew listening in saloons and observing from the fringes wouldn't be enough. He needed to get closer to the heart of Marcus Thorne's operation, closer to the flow of information about the mines. The assay office, where ore samples were processed and their value determined, seemed like a potential nexus. But access was tightly controlled, the building constantly guarded by Thorne's men. Working at the sawmill kept him on the periphery, anonymous, but also uninformed. He needed a different angle. He started paying more attention to the teamsters who hauled the ore wagons from the various mines into town. They were a transient bunch, moving between camps, privy to gossip from the diggings, and often stopping at the less reputable establishments like the Dusty Mug for cheap whiskey and respite. Cole, still playing the role of Cain, the quiet laborer, began striking up cautious conversations, buying rounds he could barely afford, listening more than talking. He learned about the routes, the schedules, the guards. He learned which teamsters were disgruntled, felt cheated by Thorne's low hauling rates, or had gambling debts that made them vulnerable. He focused his attention on one particular driver, a lanky, nervous man named Finnerty, who drove the route from a cluster of smaller, independent mines higher up in the mountains. Mines Thorne hadn't yet managed to swallow whole, but was actively squeezing. Finnerty complained bitterly about Thorne, about the assay office shorting his loads, about the arrogance of Thorne's clerks. He also seemed perpetually short of cash, his eyes constantly darting around as if expecting trouble. Cole saw an opportunity, albeit a risky one. He approached Finnerty one evening outside the Dusty Mug, offering him a shared bottle. "Heard you talking," Cole said, keeping his voice low and rough. "About Thorne, about the essays. Don't seem right how he operates." Finnerty eyed him warily, taking a swig from the bottle. "Ain't nothing right about it. Man's a damn vulture. Got this whole territory bleeding silver, and most of it ends up in his pockets. Maybe," Cole ventured carefully, "a man could find a way to balance the scales a little, if he knew the right people, knew how things worked inside." Finnerty's eyes narrowed, then flickered with a mixture of fear and avarice. "What are you getting at, Cain?" "Just thinking," Cole said vaguely. "Thinking a man who sees those ore sacks up close maybe knows the weights, the real quality before the assayers get their greedy hands on them. That information might be valuable. To someone who ain't Thorne." Finnerty licked his lips nervously. "That's dangerous talk. Thorne's got eyes and ears everywhere." "Danger's relative," Cole replied, letting the silence stretch. "So's poverty." He didn't push further, just let the seed plant itself. He knew men like Finnerty. Desperation often outweighed caution. A few days later, Finnerty sought Cole out at the lumber camp during a break. He glanced around nervously before speaking. "That information you mentioned, about the ore shipments. Maybe I see things. Maybe I overhear things." "Maybe," Cole acknowledged, keeping his face impassive. "What's it worth?" Finnerty whispered, his eyes darting around. "Depends on the information," Cole said. "Depends how accurate it is. Depends who it might hurt." He needed specifics, not just rumors. He needed proof of Thorne's systematic cheating. Over the next few weeks, a cautious, clandestine exchange began. Finnerty, emboldened by small payments Cole scraped together from his sawmill wages, started passing along details. Discrepancies between the rough weights noted at the mines and the final assays reported by Thorne's office. Observations about specific high-grade ore sacks being switched or marked down. Whispers overheard between Thorne's clerks about manipulated scales or falsified reports. It was fragmentary, circumstantial, but it painted a damning picture. Thorne wasn't just relying on inside information about new strikes. He was actively stealing from the miners, independent and perhaps even his own leased claims, through systematic fraud at the assay office. But how was he getting the initial inside information? The tips about where the richest veins lay? Cheating the assays explained how he maximized profit, but not how he consistently beat everyone else to the best ground. Cole pressed Finnerty, but the teamster only knew rumors, nothing concrete. The source of Thorne's uncanny knowledge remained elusive. During one of his infrequent trips into Redemption Creek, Cole witnessed something that shifted his focus. He saw Marshal Elias Thorne leaving the telegraph office, his face looking more drawn and weary than ever. The marshal clutched a yellow telegraph flimsy in his hand, reading it as he limped slowly back towards his office, his expression unreadable, but deeply troubled. It sparked a thought in Cole's mind. The telegraph, the lifeline connecting Redemption Creek to the outside world, carrying news, instructions, reports. Could Thorne be using it somehow? Cole needed access to the telegraph office, located in a corner of the main mercantile building, another Thorne enterprise. Getting inside unseen, accessing messages meant for Marcus Thorne or his associates seemed impossible. The operator, a quiet man named Abernathy, was known to be fiercely loyal to Thorne, who paid him well. He needed another way in. He remembered Maud, the owner of the small diner where he used to eat. Maud was a sharp, observant woman, middle-aged, widowed, with a no-nonsense attitude but a kind heart hidden beneath a crusty exterior. She saw everything that happened on Main Street from her front window, heard all the gossip over coffee and pie, and, Cole recalled, she had openly disliked Marcus Thorne's arrogance long before Cole became deputy. Perhaps she had seen or heard something useful. He waited until late one evening, after the dinner rush, and slipped into the diner just before closing. Maud was wiping down the counter, looking tired. She glanced up as he entered, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took in the scarred face and eye patch of Kane. Closing up, she said curtly, "Just need a cup of coffee, ma'am," Cole said, his voice low. Long day at the mill. He slid onto a stool at the far end of the counter, keeping his face partially turned away. Maud hesitated, then poured him a cup from the pot simmering on the stove. "Sawmill works hard," she commented, polishing the counter. "Hardly seems worth it. Way Thorne treats folks." Cole sipped the coffee. "Hear talk," he said non-committally. "Seems Thorne's got his fingers in everything these days." Maud snorted. "Fingers? More like tentacles. Strangling the life out of this town, if you ask me. Ever since, well, ever since things changed." She paused, her gaze drifting towards the sheriff's office across the street. "Poor Marshal Thorne. Ain't been the same since Deputy Travers was killed, and his own leg busted up." Cole's heart gave a lurch. "Deputy Travers?" he asked, feigning ignorance. "Heard he was killed by bandits." "That's the story," Maud said, lowering her voice slightly, leaning closer. "But some things don't add up, you ask me. The timing of the marshal's accident, Jake Riley walking away without a scratch while 3 men get gunned down, and Marcus Thorne acting like the cat that swallowed the canary ever since." She shook her head. "And now, all these telegrams." "Telegrams?" Cole prompted, keeping his voice casual. "Yeah, for Marcus Thorne. Comes in coded sometimes. Abernathy at the telegraph office. He's loyal to Thorne, tight as a drum. But my delivery boy, young Timmy, he sometimes sees things when he drops off packages. Says Thorne gets messages almost daily now. And often, right after a coded message comes in, Thorne sends one of his surveyors scrambling up into the hills." Maud frowned, It's like he knows where to look before anyone else does. Almost like someone's telling him. Coded telegrams. Surveyors dispatched immediately after. It clicked in Cole's mind, a cold, sharp realization. What if the inside information wasn't coming from local prospectors or corrupt assayers? What if it was coming from outside, from someone with access to geological surveys, territorial reports, information not readily available in Redemption Creek? Someone feeding Thorne locations of promising deposits via coded telegraph messages? It would explain Thorne's uncanny success, his ability to pinpoint rich claims. But who and why? This revelation deepened the conspiracy significantly. It suggested Thorne had powerful connections outside Redemption Creek, partners involved in his grand scheme of consolidating control over the territory's mineral wealth. The ambush might have been not just about silencing Cole, but about eliminating anyone who might stumble upon this larger operation, ensuring Thorne's communication channel remained secure. He finished his coffee, leaving a coin on the counter that was more than the coffee cost. "Thanks for the coffee, ma'am," he said gruffly. Maud just nodded, her eyes thoughtful as she watched him leave. She hadn't recognized Kane as Cole Travers, but perhaps his questions, his scarred face, had struck a chord, reminding her of the missing deputy and the unease that lingered beneath the town's prosperous facade. Cole walked back towards the lumber camp, his mind racing. Coded telegrams. That was the key. He had to see those messages. He had to know who Thorne was communicating with, what information was being exchanged. But breaking into the mercantile, overpowering Abernathy, deciphering coded messages, it seemed an insurmountable task for one man, especially one trying to remain a ghost. He needed help. He needed someone on the inside, someone who despised Thorne enough, or was desperate enough, to take the risk. His thoughts turned back to Finnerty, the nervous teamster. Finnerty delivered goods to the mercantile, knew the layout, knew the routines. Could he be persuaded, or was there someone else? Perhaps someone working within Thorne's own organization, someone disillusioned or carrying a grudge? He thought again of Marshal Elias Thorne, the troubled eyes, the heavy sadness. Did the marshal suspect his brother's corruption ran this deep? Was his grief for Cole genuine, or complicated by a terrible, hidden knowledge? Approaching the marshal was still the biggest gamble. But maybe it was the only way. Could he find a way to communicate, to plant a seed of doubt, to test the waters without revealing his own impossible survival? The path forward suddenly felt fraught with new dangers, new complexities. It wasn't just about Riley and Marcus Thorne anymore. It was about coded messages, outside conspirators, and potentially confronting the marshal himself. The stakes had just been raised considerably, and Cole felt the cold weight of the old revolver press against his side, a reminder that his deadly aim might be needed for more than just personal revenge. It might be needed to unravel a conspiracy that threatened to swallow Redemption Creek whole. Cole decided he couldn't risk approaching Marshal Thorne directly, not yet. The possibility of the marshal being compromised, willingly or unwillingly, by his brother's influence was too high. But Maud's comment about the coded telegrams had given him a new target: Abernathy, the telegraph operator. If he could somehow intercept or copy those messages, he might uncover the identity of Thorne's outside contact and the nature of their conspiracy. Getting close to Abernathy wouldn't be easy. The operator was notoriously reclusive, sticking close to his office in the corner of the Mercantile, known to be intensely loyal to Marcus Thorne, who supplemented his meager official salary generously. Cole needed leverage, something Abernathy valued more than Thorne's patronage, or feared more than Thorne's wrath. He started observing Abernathy more closely during his trips into town. The telegraph operator was a small, neat man in his late 40s, with thinning hair, spectacles perched on his nose, and perpetually ink-stained fingers. He rarely ventured out, except for brief meals at Maud's Diner, where he ate alone, reading a book, and occasional visits to the small church on Sundays. He seemed timid, unremarkable, devoted to his clicking keys. But Cole noticed something else during one late-night observation from the shadows across the street. Abernathy didn't always go straight home to his rented room after locking up the Mercantile and Telegraph office. Sometimes, he made a detour to a small, discreet cabin on the edge of town, staying only a short while before returning to his own lodgings. Cole investigated cautiously. The cabin belonged to Sarah Jenkins, the young widow whose husband had died in that tragic mine cave-in on the claim Marcus Thorne subsequently acquired. Sarah was now struggling to raise her young son alone, working long hours doing laundry for the more prosperous townsfolk, including Marcus Thorne himself. A secret relationship? A forbidden affection? Or perhaps something more transactional? Abernathy, the lonely, timid operator, and Sarah Jenkins, the vulnerable, grieving widow. It was a potential vulnerability, a pressure point Cole might be able to exploit. But using Sarah, involving her in the dangerous game he was playing, felt wrong. It echoed the ruthlessness he despised in Thorne. He needed another way. He continued gathering information from Finnerty, the teamster. Finnerty confirmed that Abernathy handled all of Marcus Thorne's personal and business telegrams, often working late into the night, decoding or encoding messages. He also mentioned something else. Abernathy had a weakness for rare books. Apparently, the telegraph operator had been saving for years to acquire a specific first edition he'd seen advertised back east, a collection of poetry. It was an expensive indulgence, far beyond his usual means. Rare books. An unexpected vulnerability. Cole filed the information away. Where would a man like Kane get his hands on a rare book? It seemed unlikely, but the information itself was valuable. Meanwhile, the tension in Redemption Creek continued to mount. Thorne, emboldened by the lack of consequences following the failed attack on the Cartwrights, Cole learned that Stone, Pike, and Reno had been quietly released by a circuit judge widely known to be in Thorne's pocket. Citing lack of evidence, became even more brazen. Another independent miner, old Jed Parsons, who had loudly accused Thorne of cheating him at the assay office, was found dead at the bottom of his mine shaft. Another accident. Fear tightened its grip on the town. People whispered, but no one dared speak out. Marshal Thorne seemed powerless, or perhaps unwilling, to investigate thoroughly, hampered by his injury and, Cole suspected, by his brother's suffocating influence. Cole felt time running out. He couldn't keep working at the sawmill indefinitely, couldn't keep relying on Finnerty's fragmented information. He needed definitive proof, something that would expose Marcus Thorne's entire operation, including the murders and the conspiracy behind the inside information. He needed those telegrams. He decided to gamble. He took almost all the money he'd painstakingly saved from the sawmill work. He knew of a larger town, Helena, a couple of days' ride away, which had a reputable book dealer. It was a long shot, but Abernathy's desire for that rare book might be the key. He requested a few days off from the sawmill, claiming family business. A vague excuse Harker accepted with a grunt. Using the tracking skills honed under Ishki, Cole traveled swiftly and cautiously to Helena, avoiding main roads. He found the book dealer and, masking his disfigurement as best he could, inquired about the specific volume of poetry Abernathy coveted. Luck, for once, seemed to be with him. The dealer had a copy, acquired recently from an estate sale. It was expensive, costing nearly every cent Cole possessed, but he bought it without haggling. The small, leather-bound volume felt strangely heavy in his hands, a tool as potentially potent as his revolver. He returned to Redemption Creek, under the cover of darkness, the book carefully wrapped and hidden. Now came the most dangerous part, approaching Abernathy. He couldn't do it openly. He waited until late one night, long after the town had gone quiet, and positioned himself near the path Abernathy took from the telegraph office back to his room. As the small, neat figure of the telegraph operator approached, walking briskly, clutching his satchel, Cole stepped out of the shadows. Abernathy gasped, stumbling back, his eyes wide with fear behind his spectacles. "Don't be alarmed, Mr. Abernathy," Cole said, keeping his voice low and calm. "I'm not here to harm you, just to talk about books." Abernathy stared at the scarred face, the eye patch. Who are you? What do you want?" "They call me Kane," Cole said, "and I believe I have something you desire very much." He slowly unwrapped the book, holding it so the title glinted in the faint moonlight. Abernathy's breath hitched, his eyes fixed on the book, widening in disbelief, then filling with an almost desperate longing. "How? Where did you get that?" "Let's just say I acquire things," Cole replied cryptically. "It can be yours, Mr. Abernathy, a gift, in exchange for a small favor." Abernathy tore his gaze away from the book, suspicion and fear returning. "A favor? What kind of favor? I work for Mr. Thorne. I can't—" "I know who you work for," Cole interrupted softly. "I know about the coded messages, the ones relaying geological information, the ones directing Thorne where to strike next." Abernathy went pale, visibly trembling. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Cole took a step closer. "I know about the timed dispatches of surveyors after certain messages arrive. I know about the convenient accidents that happen to miners who own the land Thorne suddenly wants. I know Marcus Thorne is building an empire on stolen information and, likely, murder. And I know you, Mr. Abernathy, are the gatekeeper of those secrets." Abernathy swallowed hard, looking trapped. "He pays me well. He protects me." "Does he?" Cole countered. "Or does he merely use you?" "What happens when you're no longer useful, Abernathy? When the mines are all consolidated? When the messages stop? Do you think a man like Marcus Thorne values loyalty? Or does he discard tools when they've served their purpose? Like he discarded Deputy Travers? Like he discarded Jed Parsons?" The mention of the dead miner seemed to strike a nerve. Abernathy flinched. "This," Cole said, holding up the book again, "is your chance. Your chance to own something beautiful, something you've always wanted. And maybe your chance to do something right, something that might weigh favorably against enabling Thorn's crimes when the reckoning comes. Because it is coming, Mr. Abernathy. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. I don't need you to betray Thorn openly. I just need copies. Copies of the coded messages he sends and receives, especially the ones concerning new strikes, geological data. Leave them somewhere safe. Somewhere I can retrieve them unnoticed. Do this, and the book is yours. Refuse? Cole let the threat hang, unspoken but palpable. Abernathy stared at the book, then at Cole's one hard eye, then down at his own trembling hands. He was torn between fear of Thorn and the consuming desire for the book, perhaps coupled with a dawning fear of his own complicity. Cole saw the struggle in the man's face. Think about Sarah Jenkins, Mr. Abernathy, Cole added softly, playing his last, reluctant card. Think about the kind of town Thorn is building. Is that the future you want for her son? That sealed it. Abernathy looked up, his expression a mixture of desperation and resolve. Where? He whispered. Where do I leave them? Cole designated a hidden spot, a loose stone in the foundation behind the rarely used ice house at the edge of town. Copies only. Tonight's messages, tomorrow's. As soon as you can. Leave them tonight or tomorrow night. I'll check after midnight both nights. Once I have them, I'll leave the book in the same place. Abernathy nodded jerkily, clutching his satchel tighter. All right, I'll do it. He glanced around nervously. Now go, before someone sees you. Cole melted back into the shadows, leaving Abernathy alone in the moonlit street, clutching his satchel and his terrible choice. Cole felt a pang of guilt for manipulating the man, for using his weakness, his connection to Sarah Jenkins. But the stakes were too high. He needed those messages. He spent the next day and night in a state of heightened tension, working at the sawmill, waiting. Doubts assailed him. Would Abernathy go through with it? Would he betray Cole to Thorn instead? Had Cole pushed him too far? Just after midnight the following night, Cole slipped away from the lumber camp and made his way cautiously to the ice house. His heart pounded as he reached down, felt behind the loose foundation stone. His fingers closed around a small, folded packet of papers. He pulled them out, his hand trembling slightly. He replaced them immediately with the wrapped volume of poetry. Retreating quickly to the safety of the woods, he unfolded the papers by the light of a carefully shielded sliver of moon. They were copies, hastily scribbled, of several telegrams, some incoming, some outgoing, all in a complex numerical code. It was the proof he needed. Now came the challenge of deciphering them. His own martial training included some basic code work, but this looked more complex. He stared at the meaningless strings of numbers, frustration building. Then he noticed something. Abernathy, perhaps in haste, perhaps deliberately, had included not just the coded messages, but also the cover sheets, which contained routing information. One name appeared repeatedly on the incoming coded messages, originating from Denver. Gideon Blackwood, Territorial Geological Survey. Gideon Blackwood, Territorial Geological Survey. The pieces slammed into place with stunning clarity. Blackwood, using his official position, was feeding Marcus Thorn privileged geological data via coded telegram, likely in exchange for a share of the immense profits. Together, they were systematically identifying and acquiring the richest mineral deposits in the territory, using fraud, intimidation, and murder to eliminate obstacles. The ambush, Cole's death, the Marshall's accident, it was all part of silencing potential threats and securing their corrupt enterprise. This was bigger than Redemption Creek. This reached into the territorial government itself. Exposing Marcus Thorne might not be enough. He had a powerful, well-placed partner. Suddenly, Cole understood the depth of the conspiracy and the depth of the danger he was in. He wasn't just facing a greedy local tyrant. He was facing a potentially vast network. But now, finally, he held the key. These coded messages, if deciphered, could bring the whole rotten structure crashing down. He just had to figure out how. And he had to do it before Thorne or the newly implicated Gideon Blackwood realized their secrets were compromised. The emotional twist wasn't a betrayal, but the revelation of the conspiracy's true scope, transforming Cole's personal quest for vengeance into a fight against a much larger, more insidious corruption. He held the proof, but the knowledge made him more vulnerable than ever. Cole knew he couldn't decipher the complex numerical code himself, not quickly enough. He needed help, someone with a logical mind, perhaps experience with ciphers or complex mathematics. His thoughts immediately went to one person in Redemption Creek, Doc Evans. The town physician was elderly, yes, often overworked and fond of his evening whiskey, but Cole remembered him as being surprisingly sharp, well-read, with a background that hinted at more education than typical for a frontier doctor. More importantly, Doc Evans had always seemed quietly disdainful of Marcus Thorne's heavy-handed influence and had treated Marshall Thorne's broken leg, possibly giving him insight into the suspicious nature of the accident. He also seemed to possess a fundamental decency. It was another gamble, but perhaps his best one. Cole waited until the following evening, choosing a time when the doc was likely finished with his rounds, but before he'd settled too deeply into his whiskey bottle. He approached the small clapboard house that served as both Evans's home and surgery, tapping lightly on the door. Doc Evans opened it himself, peering out through spectacles that magnified his tired eyes. He squinted at the scarred face of Kane. Yes? What is it? Surgery's closed for the night unless it's an emergency. It might be, Doc, Cole said quietly. Just not the medical kind. Can I come in? I need your help. And your discretion. The doc hesitated, studying him intently. Perhaps something in Cole's good eye, some echo of the deputy he once knew, registered. Or perhaps it was the urgency in his tone. All right, he sighed, stepping back. Come in. But make it quick. I was just about to pour myself a medicinal. Inside the cluttered front room, smelling faintly of antiseptic and old books, Cole didn't waste time. He pulled out the copied telegrams Abernathy had provided. Doc, I need your help deciphering these. I believe they contain evidence of serious crimes committed by Marcus Thorne, possibly reaching beyond Redemption Creek. Doc Evans took the papers, adjusted his spectacles, and scanned the pages filled with numbers. He frowned, his bushy white eyebrows drawing together. Numerical cipher. Looks complex. Where did you get these, Kane? Cole took a deep breath. It was time to shed the borrowed identity, at least partially. My name isn't Kane, Doc. It's Coleman Travers. The doctor's eyes widened behind his spectacles. He stared at Cole, truly seeing him for the first time. The height, the build, the way he held himself despite the scars and the patch. Travers? Deputy Travers? But you were killed, ambushed in the pass. Left for dead, Doc, Cole corrected grimly. Not quite the same thing. Riley and Marcus Thorne staged the whole thing, murdered the guards, took the silver, and tried to eliminate me because I represented the law Thorne couldn't control. Doc Evans sank heavily into a nearby chair, looking utterly stunned. Marcus? And Riley? I suspected something wasn't right about that ambush and Elias's fall, but his own brother. He shook his head slowly. That ambitious viper. He looked back at the telegrams, then at Cole. And these messages? I believe they're coded communications between Marcus Thorne and a man named Gideon Blackwood at the Territorial Geological Survey in Denver, Cole explained quickly. I think Blackwood is feeding Thorne inside information on mineral deposits, helping him steal claims and consolidate power. Doc Evans whistled softly. Blackwood. Yes, I've heard the name. Influential man. This is bigger than I imagined. He picked up the telegrams again, his expression shifting from shock to intense concentration. All right, Travers. All right. Let's see what we can make of this cipher. My brain isn't what it used to be, but I dabbled in cryptography back in my university days. Might take some time. For the next few hours, they worked together under the flickering lamplight. Doc Evans, his mind surprisingly sharp, despite his earlier fatigue, examined the patterns, the frequencies of numbers, testing various cipher methods, substitution, transposition, Vigenère squares. Cole watched, offering suggestions based on his limited knowledge and providing context about Thorne's operations, names of mines, likely keywords. It was slow, painstaking work. Finally, Doc Evans let out a grunt of satisfaction. Got it, I think. It's a variation of a book cipher, but keyed to a specific, rather obscure text. Thorne's probably got a copy. Blackwood, too. He began rapidly scribbling on a piece of paper, translating the numbers into letters, then words. The deciphered messages confirmed Cole's suspicions, starkly and chillingly. Coordinates for rich, unrecorded silver veins. Instructions on how to manipulate assays for specific ore shipments. Coded references to silencing potential threats. Deal with the Parsons problem. Ensure the Cartwright claim is vacated permanently. And confirmation of Gideon Blackwood's active partnership, discussing profit splits and future territorial acquisitions. It was all there, damning and irrefutable proof of a vast conspiracy built on theft, fraud, and murder. We need to get this to the marshal, Doc Evans said, his voice grim, looking at the damning translations scattered across his table. Elias has to see this. He has to know what his brother truly is. Are you sure we can trust him, Doc? Cole asked. The old doubts lingering. Marcus is his brother. The pressure on him must be immense. Elias Thorne is a good man, Travers. The doctor insisted firmly. Weighted down, maybe, slowed by injury and perhaps fear. But he's got a core of decency Marcus never possessed. He grieved for you, genuinely. And I know he's had his own suspicions about Marcus, things he couldn't prove, maybe couldn't bring himself to fully believe. This, he tapped the deciphered messages. This will force his hand. He has to see it. Cole weighed the risks. Going to the marshal now with this proof felt different. It wasn't just his word against Thorne anymore. It was documented evidence of high-level corruption and murder. Doc Evans's conviction about the marshal's character tipped the balance. All right, Doc. How do we get it to him? And how do we protect Abernathy? If Thorne finds out he copied these messages, Abernathy? Doc Evans sighed. He took a terrible risk. We need to get him out of town, quietly, before Thorne realizes the leak. As for Elias, I'll go to him. Now, I'll show him these. You, he looked at Cole, need to stay hidden. If Elias decides to act, Thorne will lash out like a cornered snake. He still thinks you're dead. Let's keep that advantage as long as possible. Doc Evans carefully gathered the deciphered messages and the originals. He checked his own pistol, a small Colt pocket model, tucked it into his coat. Wait here, Travers. Keep the door barred. I shouldn't be long. He slipped out into the night, heading towards the marshal's office, leaving Cole alone in the cluttered room, the weight of the coming confrontation settling heavily upon him. The wait was agonizing. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant dog bark sounded like impending danger. Cole paced the small room, his good eye scanning the shuttered windows, his hand never far from the old revolver. Had Doc Evans reached the marshal? What was happening? Was Elias Thorne absorbing the shock, grappling with the betrayal? Or had Marcus already anticipated this, somehow intercepted the doctor? Finally, after what felt like hours, there was a soft, distinct tapping on the back door of the surgery. Not Doc Evans's usual knock. Cole froze, listening intently. The tapping came again, a prearranged signal he and the doc hadn't arranged, but one Cole recognized from his deputy days. The signal Elias Thorne used when approaching a potentially dangerous situation quietly. Cole moved to the door, revolver ready, but held low. "Marshal?" he whispered. "It's me, Cole," came the low, strained reply. "Let me in, alone." Cole unbarred the door. Marshal Elias Thorne stood there, leaning heavily on his cane, his face illuminated by the faint light spilling from the room. He looked older, exhausted, his eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief, grief, and a terrible, hardening resolve. He stepped inside, and Cole quickly rebarred the door. "Doc Evans showed me," the marshal said, his voice rough with emotion. He didn't look directly at Cole's scarred face, perhaps unable to process the reality of his survival just yet. His gaze was fixed on the deciphered telegrams Doc Evans had presumably left on the table. "My own brother. And Blackwood. All this time." He shook his head slowly, the movement conveying a profound, soul-deep weariness. "I suspected, Cole. Feared it, maybe. But I never imagined the depth of it. The murders. You." His voice broke slightly. He finally looked up, meeting Cole's single eye. "They told me bandits killed you. I grieved for you, son, truly." "I know, Marshal," Cole said quietly. Marcus and Riley played their parts well. Too well, Elias Thorne spat, a flash of uncharacteristic anger animating his features. They played me for a fool. Used my grief, my injury. He straightened up, despite the pain his leg clearly caused him. The weary resignation was fading, replaced by the steely glint of the lawman Cole remembered. Well, the game ends now. What's the plan, Marshal? Cole asked. Marcus still controls most of the hired guns in town, and Riley is always close by. If we move openly... We can't move openly, the Marshal agreed. Not yet. He still has too much power, too many listening ears. And Blackwood, we need to handle this carefully. Make sure the territorial authorities get involved, but only when we have Thorne secured. First, we need to neutralize Marcus and Riley, and we need to protect Abernathy and Sarah Jenkins. Abernathy's terrified, Cole said. He needs to disappear. Doc Evans is arranging that right now, the Marshal replied. He's getting Abernathy and the Jenkins woman and her boy quietly out of town tonight, heading towards Helena under escort by a couple of trusted men Doc knows. They'll be safe. He paused, leaning on his cane. Which leaves Marcus and Riley. They'll be at Solomon's Palace tonight. Marcus holds court there every evening, surrounded by his cronies and Riley. A direct assault is suicide, Cole stated. Exactly, the Marshal nodded. Which is why we won't make a direct assault. We use the truth, and we use surprise. He looked at Cole, a plan forming in his eyes. Marcus thinks you're dead. Riley thinks you're dead. That's our ace in the hole. Can you still shoot, Cole? With the eye? Cole thought of the long hours of practice, the intense focus, the uncanny accuracy he'd achieved. Slower, he admitted, but straighter than ever. The Marshal nodded grimly. Good, because tonight, Deputy, you're going back on duty, unofficially. The plan was audacious, risky, relying on surprise and Marcus Thorne's arrogance. The Marshal, using his official authority, would enter Solomon's Palace alone, ostensibly for a drink, something he rarely did, which would itself cause notice. He would confront his brother publicly, not with accusations of murder initially, but with the deciphered telegrams, accusing him of fraud and conspiracy with Gideon Blackwood. Waving the proof. The aim was to create chaos, confusion, to sow doubt among Thorne's men, and, crucially, to draw Marcus and Riley out, separating them slightly from their guards in the ensuing turmoil. Cole's role was to be the ghost. He would position himself beforehand, hidden, somewhere offering a clear line of sight into the main saloon area. He would wait for the Marshal's signal, or for the moment Marcus or Riley made a move against Elias. His job wasn't to start a gunfight, but to end one before it could escalate fatally for the Marshal, using his deadly, precise aim to neutralize the primary threats, Marcus Thorne and Jake Riley. Speed wouldn't matter as much as accuracy and the element of complete surprise. Getting into position was the first challenge. Solomon's Palace was large, opulent, and well-guarded. Cole, guided by the Marshal's knowledge of the building's layout, slipped through the back alleys under the cover of deepest night. He found a rarely used storage room adjacent to the main saloon, separated by a wall with a small, grimy window high up, likely used for ventilation, currently boarded over loosely from the inside. Using his knife, Cole carefully pried loose a couple of boards, creating a narrow slit, barely visible from the saloon floor, but offering a surprisingly clear, albeit limited, view of the main bar area in the corner where Marcus Thorne usually held court. It was cramped, dusty, and offered no easy escape, but it would have to do. He settled in, the old cap and ball revolver resting steady in his hand, his single eye pressed close to the slit, watching, waiting. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer and cheap perfume drifting from the saloon. He watched as the saloon filled up. Miners, gamblers, merchants, women in flashy dresses. He saw Marcus Thorne arrive, impeccably dressed, radiating confidence, taking his usual table, surrounded by sycophants. He saw Jake Riley join him, looking relaxed, accepting congratulations on some crooked card game he'd likely just won. Thorne's hired guns positioned themselves strategically around the room, watchful but relaxed, expecting no trouble in their boss's domain. Then, the Batwing doors swung open, and Marshal Elias Thorne limped in, leaning heavily on his cane. A hush fell over the saloon. Heads turned. The Marshal rarely entered Solomon's palace. He walked slowly, deliberately towards his brother's table. His face set like granite. "Marcus," the Marshal's voice cut through the sudden silence, clear and cold. "We need to talk. About these." He held up the sheaf of deciphered telegrams. Marcus Thorne looked up, surprised, then annoyed. "Elias? What is this? If you have official business—" "Oh, it's official," the Marshal interrupted, his voice ringing with authority Cole hadn't heard in months. "Official evidence of fraud, conspiracy to defraud the territory, illegal acquisition of claims, all detailed right here. Messages between you and your partner, Gideon Blackwood." The name Blackwood hung in the air. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Marcus Thorne's face paled slightly, then flushed with anger. Riley tensed beside him, his hand drifting towards his sidearm. Thorne's guards shifted, their eyes darting between the Marshal and their boss. "You're drunk, Elias," Marcus sneered, trying to regain control. "Making wild accusations. Those papers mean nothing." "They mean prison, Marcus," the Marshal stated flatly. "For you and Blackwood, I have proof." He waved the papers again. "Proof of your entire rotten scheme." "You have nothing," Marcus snarled, rising slightly from his chair. "Guards, escort the Marshal out. He's clearly unwell." The guards hesitated, looking uncertain, caught between the Marshal's authority and Thorne's command. Riley, however, didn't hesitate. His eyes locked on the Marshal, a predator recognizing imminent danger. He started to rise, his hand moving decisively towards the gun holstered under his coat. Cole saw the movement through the narrow slit. Time seemed to slow. He brought the old revolver up, finding that state of intense, unwavering focus. His target wasn't the large shape of Riley's body, but the smaller, more difficult target of the gun hand moving under the coat. Breathe slow. Squeeze. The cap and ball revolver boomed, the sound shockingly loud, filling the sudden silence before Riley could complete his draw. Riley screamed, staggering back, clutching his right hand, his gun clattering uselessly to the floor. His drawing hand was shattered, useless. Pandemonium erupted. Men shouted, women screamed, people scrambled for cover. Marcus Thorne stared, stunned, first at Riley, then wildly around the room, searching for the source of the impossible shot. His guards, spooked and confused, drew their weapons but seemed unsure who to target. "Nobody move!" Marshal Thorne roared, drawing his own Colt, ignoring the pain in his leg, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Marcus Thorne, you are under arrest!" Marcus, trapped, desperate, his empire crumbling around him, made a fatal mistake. Instead of surrendering, he lunged for the fallen Riley's gun lying on the floor. Cole, already anticipating, shifted his aim fractionally. Marcus Thorne's back was to him now as he bent down. Another deliberate, focused shot. The heavy ball struck Thorne high in the shoulder, spinning him around, sending him crashing back against his table. He wasn't dead, but he was down, incapacitated, howling in pain and impotent rage. 2 shots. Precise, disabling, unexpected. Fired by a ghost. Marshal Thorne seized the advantage. "Drop your weapons," he commanded Thorne's remaining guards, his gun steady. "It's over. Your boss is finished." The guards, leaderless, seeing Riley and Thorne both down, seeing the marshal standing resolute and utterly bewildered by the shots seemingly coming from nowhere, hesitated for only a moment before slowly, reluctantly lowering their guns. Cole watched from his hiding place as the marshal, with the help of Dusty Sam and other townsfolk who quickly rallied to the lawman's side now that Thorne's power was broken, secured the prisoners and restored a semblance of order. He saw the shock and disbelief on people's faces as they realized what had happened. The whispers starting. Who fired those shots? He waited until the saloon was clearing, until the marshal had Thorne and Riley under heavy guard, then slipped out of the storage room and back into the alleys, melting away unseen. His part was done. The ghost had delivered its message. Justice, or the beginning of it, had come to Redemption Creek, fired from the steady hand of a man with only one eye, but perfect aim. The immediate aftermath in Redemption Creek was tumultuous but decisive. With Marcus Thorne and Jake Riley wounded and under arrest, their network of hired guns and informants quickly dissolved, lacking leadership and fearing implication. Marshal Elias Thorne, despite his injury, moved swiftly to consolidate control, deputizing trustworthy citizens like Dusty Sam and overseeing the collection of evidence from Thorne's office and the assay office. Evidence that corroborated the deciphered telegrams. News of Gideon Blackwood's involvement, relayed by telegraph, sent by the marshal himself this time, caused a scandal in the territorial capital. Blackwood was swiftly arrested by federal marshals. His political career and corrupt enterprise shattered. The conspiracy, far-reaching as it was, unraveled quickly once its linchpins were removed. Abernathy, Sarah Jenkins, and her son made it safely to Helena, where Doc Evans arranged for them to start new lives, far from the traumatic memories of Redemption Creek. Finnerty, the teamster, fearing retribution, or perhaps seeking leniency, provided a full confession detailing his role in passing information and witnessing Thorne's manipulations, further solidifying the case. Marcus Thorne and Jake Riley, facing overwhelming evidence and damning testimony, were eventually tried by a federal judge. Thorne, stripped of his wealth and influence, received a lengthy prison sentence for conspiracy, fraud, and accessory to murder. Riley, for his direct role in the ambush and murders, faced the gallows, a justice Cole found stark but necessary. And what of Cole Travers? He didn't reappear publicly. He watched the proceedings from the shadows, ensuring the marshal remained safe, ensuring the truth held fast. He met secretly with Marshal Thorne and Doc Evans one last time. "You could have your badge back, Cole," Elias Thorne offered earnestly, the old respect clear in his eyes. "Redemption Creek owes you. I owe you." Cole shook his head, touching the leather patch over his missing eye. "That man, Deputy Travers, he died in Devil's Jaw Pass, Marshal. Kane survived, and Kane, he doesn't belong behind a badge anymore. The cold focus required for his deadly aim, the isolation he'd endured, the ghosts of the men killed in the ambush, they had changed him in ways he couldn't undo. The path of the lawman felt closed to him now. "What will you do?" Doc Evans asked gently. "Ishki taught me things," Cole said. A flicker of something like peace in his good eye. How to live with the mountains, not just fight against them. "Maybe I'll head back that way. Find some quiet." He paused. "Or maybe there are other towns, other places where justice needs a nudge from the shadows." He wasn't sure himself. His future felt as wide and uncertain as the territory itself. He left Redemption Creek as quietly as he had returned, riding a sturdy horse acquired with funds Marshal Thorne pressed upon him. He didn't look back. He left behind a town slowly healing, freed from tyranny, but scarred by the corruption it had allowed to fester. He left behind the memory of Deputy Travers, the hero, and carried with him the reality of Kane, the survivor, the man forged in betrayal and loss, who had found a terrible strength in his weakness. He rode towards the high mountains, towards the silence Ishki had shown him. The old cap and ball revolver was tucked away, cleaned and oiled, a tool he hoped never to use again, but kept close nonetheless. The world looked different through his one eye, flatter, perhaps, but also sharper, stripped of illusion. He had faced his demons, confronted his betrayers, and chosen justice over simple vengeance. Though the line had often blurred, he hadn't regained what he lost, but he had reclaimed himself. And sometimes, in the harsh calculus of the West, that was victory enough. Sound of gentle, reflective acoustic guitar music begins, subtly underscoring Joe's closing remarks. Joe Rivers, Coleman Travers, a man stripped bare, left for dead, forced to remake himself in the crucible of loss and betrayal. His journey reminds us that the deepest wounds aren't always visible. Losing an eye, that's a profound physical blow. But the deeper wound was the betrayal, the shattering of trust, the loss of identity. Yet, from that brokenness, something unexpected emerged. A new focus, a terrible, precise skill born from adapting to limitation. It's a powerful metaphor, isn't it? How often does adversity, does loss, force us to see the world differently, to develop strengths we never knew we possessed? Cole's perfect aim wasn't magic. It was the result of intense concentration, of shutting out distractions, of channeling all his remaining energy towards a single point. Sometimes, losing one perspective allows us to gain a sharper focus on what truly matters. His story also speaks to the complex nature of justice on the frontier. It wasn't always clean, wasn't always served by the book. Cole walked a knife's edge between justice and vengeance. He had every reason to seek bloody revenge, yet ultimately he chose to expose the truth, to dismantle the corrupt system, even if it meant fading back into the shadows himself rather than reclaiming his old life. It raises the question, what is true justice? Is it punishment, retribution, or is it the restoration of balance, the revelation of truth, even if the path is morally gray? And think about resilience. Left broken and alone, Cole didn't just survive. He adapted. He learned. He grew stronger in his broken places. He found help in unexpected corners. The quiet wisdom of Ishki, the steady decency of Doc Evans, the hesitant courage of Abernathy. It reminds us that even in the darkest times, embers of hope and humanity can be found. That strength often comes not just from within, but from the connections we forge, however tentative. Cole's journey teaches us that scars don't have to be the end of the story. They can be reminders of battles fought, lessons learned, resilience discovered. Perfect aim came at the cost of an eye, but perhaps it also brought a clearer vision of the world, stripped of naive trust, focused on the hard, essential truths. Guitar music swells slightly, then softens again. Joe Rivers. Out here, in the vastness of the West, stories like Cole Travers's are etched into the landscape. Stories of survival against impossible odds, of justice sought in the face of corruption, of the human spirit's remarkable ability to adapt and endure, even to find strength in what seems like weakness. If Cole's struggle, his transformation, and his difficult choices resonated with you tonight, I hope you'll carry his story with you. Share it if you feel so moved. Let these echoes from our past remind us of the enduring power of resilience and the complexities of justice. And if you want to hear more, Voices of Justice, more tales that explore the heart and soul of the American West, then make sure you subscribe, join our community. We'll keep the campfire burning for you. Until next time, may you find focus in challenging times. May you seek truth, even when the path is difficult. And may you always remember the hidden strengths that can be forged in the fires of adversity. This is Joe Rivers, wishing you clarity, courage, and a steady aim on the things that truly matter. Good night, friends. 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 Good night.